Katie St. Clair is a seasoned strength coach, educator, and entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience in the fitness industry. She is the founder of Empowered Performance, a program and academy designed to elevate the standards of coaching through in depth understanding of biomechanics, anatomy, respiration, and creative thinking. Katie's work focuses on empowering other coaches and movement professionals to create transformative experiences for their clients by fostering a love of movement. The human body is a highly intricate system with countless ways to approach its training, whether focusing on mechanics, mental aspects, muscles, or connective tissues. Every part is interconnected, with systems and joints working harmoniously to create movement. Welcome to the show, Katie. Okay, Katie, so great to meet you. Thank you so much for being on. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to do this and talk to you.
I feel like we've been kind of following each other and stalking each other's profiles for a really long time. So it's just really nice to see your face and to be able to have this conversation.
Yeah, same. I love your message, and I'm just excited to share my message with your audience.
Yes. So first, I always like to start off with some rapid fire questions, and I like to say that with a grain of salt because some of these questions are not rapid fire by any means. So feel free to answer them as you wish. But why do women lift heavy and feel strong, but they don't feel athletic?
Great question. I think that there is a big difference between feeling strong and lifting heavy. One of the components of athleticism, and maybe the biggest component actually, is the ability to push pressure up vertically against the floor. So things like squats and deadlifts and all of those things help you do that. But another key component is the ability to rotate in your body. And that means like let's say I play pickleball because I'm a big pickleball nerd, but let's say I'm reaching to get a shot across the court. My body, my hip, my shoulders, my thorax, all of that has to be able to rotate well so I can go into that motion and then stop that rotation and push out of that motion. And most general strength doesn't necessarily emphasize that as much. So while a squat and a hinge and all of those things will improve relative motion at the joints, which just made like a fancy word for saying it allows your joints to move into different rotations, it's not the same as then using that motion in different planes of motion.
How good are you at pickleball? Would you say you're professional at this point?
No. But I will say I'm getting better. I just started back in December of last year, and I really love it. I did play tennis in high school and like in my 20s. Okay. So, I mean, I have a little bit of the background, but I think it's just nice to have a sport like that to play where you're with other people, but you don't have to pre-plan it because you can just show up on a court and have your racket and then you just play with different people. So the barrier to entry is really low. I don't have to like find a partner to play tennis with me or join a clinic. I can just show up. So it's
nice.
Good. Yeah.
Good for you. You just go solo with your racket and you're like, I'm ready to go.
Exactly. So in my neighborhood, just like a few blocks from my house, every single day they have play from 7 a.m. till noon, and it's outdoor courts. So if it's raining, obviously there isn't, but you just drop in, and then you just rotate on which court you were in. So I think that's why people love it.
Yeah,
because it's just low barrier, you know.
Yeah. I started playing like a few years ago, but I'm not consistent enough to get better. And so I always appreciate the fact that like people are into it. So what is the biggest mistake women make when trying to move like an athlete?
So I think it's not understanding the demands that are connective tissue. So tendons, ligaments, those things that can get injured very easily. It's not understanding how to train that well, but also using things like plyometrics or agility drills as conditioning. I'm not saying you can't, but when you're just like mindlessly going through jumping drills and stuff just to get your heart rate up and like get a good sweat to burn calories, that doesn't have the same carryover as being very conscious of what you're doing and why you're doing it in those drills.
I would say if anything I get from your page, Katie, it's that you're very intentional with your movement patterns. And so I would use that here for sure. You teach ribs over hips. What does that mean? And why does it matter?
Okay. So the reason I teach that is because a lot of people have the ability to push their rib cage forward. So kind of flare the ribs forward, arch through their back. And they can get in that position really well and they can take a nice deep breath. So if you're listening to this, if you kind of arch your back and then flare your ribs forward and then you take a big inhale and then a long exhale, it's kind of super easy. But then if I try to have the person do the same thing, keep their ribs back and kind of drop the front of their rib cage and take a big inhale, it's like, oh, wow, it's much harder to breathe. And so for me, the ability to manage the pressure inside of our rib cage and our pelvis that is in that cavity of our body is what allows us to get into different positions.
What is one movement pattern you wish everyone would fix?
Oh, a movement pattern that everyone would fix. That's a good question.
Especially before adding on weight, getting a PR, trying to like push themselves like to a higher limit
I would
of
say
strength.
the last question.
That.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would want someone to be able to get a good stack, get the pressure to go back and forward, but back also. And
Yeah.
if they can do that well, their lifts are probably going to they're going to go higher. They're going to be able to manage more load because they're not fighting their own body. And they're likely going to feel better too.
If someone's always sore or tight, what is really going on?
Well, they could just have shitty programming. Not sure if I want to say that word.
Of course.
So it could just be that they're just doing too much and not allowing for rest. It could be that their position is not allowing for the motion that they're trying to do. So let's say I go into a hinge and every single time I do that, my hip hikes out to the side. Well, that's putting extra stress on certain joints and then it doesn't feel good over time. And that same thing can be happening in a lot of different movement patterns. And so sometimes it is positional and what's going on from a biomechanic lens.
So, Katie, forgive me, you coach in person, but you also do some online stuff. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
How do you coach some of the cues that you give? Because even some of the movements that I watch you do, I'm like, how is she actually doing that in like an online or more voice centric way for people to really get it?
Yeah, well, I'll say this. Some of the stuff that you might be seeing me do on Instagram might be a little bit for the audience to, it's exciting, it looks different, and that is kind of getting your wheels turning. In terms of in person, I use a lot more constraints than cues. So I can put a ball between their ribs and their knees. I can, do different things. And the cues are a little bit easier because I can put my hands on them and say, do you feel this? So in terms of cueing online, it's obviously harder. So you want to start with progressions that are easier that you don't have to cue as much. But even in those progressions, if you've trained enough people, you're going to start seeing the same compensations over and over again. And usually the same compensations are in all of the other movement patterns. So you're just reinforcing, hey, did you notice your right hip is hiking up again? Hey, did you notice your left rib cage is kind of flaring out again? So people get used to the same cues and then their body adapts to kind of counter that over time.
That's such a great lead into what are the same kind of things that you see all the time, especially on women. And let's just say our age range is like 30 plus.
So what kind of compensations that they're?
Yeah, like what do you see over and over again?
So hip hiking is a big one. So let's say I'm going down in a split squat, like a lunge position. And then that hip that's in the front is hiking up towards the ribs and kind of out to the side. So there's a little potentially laxity or not enough glute control on that side. And so especially in females with the shape of our pelvises, it makes it easier for those things to happen. So in general, I tend to find that more women have more laxity in their bodies. And we also have rib cages that are a little bit more narrow. And not always, there are women who have wider rib cages, but it's not as common. And so the rib cage becomes more restricted. and the extremities have more laxity. And so those are some of the things that I look out for to hopefully either cue them out of it or give them constraints like adding in bands or balls or blocks between their knees or whatever, just to give them a little more stability so they feel a little bit safer in their body and can lift heavier.
Okay, so if a woman has this compensation, like what would you potentially tell them if they were online and they're hearing this and they're taking a video of themselves and they're like, "Oh wow, like my hip does that too." What could they potentially do on their own?
Yeah, good question. So the first thing I do is have them just shift their center of mass forward and back. So let's say I'm in a kickstand hinge or a lunge position or a split squat. Sometimes just by shifting into a little more of the front of my foot, the body builds tension, the posterior chain comes on, and then there's less of that compensation. So that's number one, because it's the easier of the two, I think, to cue. The second is I'll have them put their hands on their hips and then hike the opposite hip up and then kind of hike back and forth between the hips and find that place where when you unhike, that is when you're going to feel more tension in the glutes, in the hamstrings, and everything kind of coming on board usually.
Okay, that's really helpful to know. And I will just throw this out there. I tell all of my clients, I'm sure you do too, to film yourself. Sometimes you can't see it or don't know it's happening, and then you watch the video back and you're like, "Oh shoot, like I'm actually doing that myself." Are you a big proponent of that as well?
Oh, even myself, because I'm taking videos of myself and I'm like, Katie, what are you doing? I didn't even know I was doing that. Yeah. Yeah.
Same, yes. Okay, so hips, what else would you say is like a something that people overcompensate a little bit, women specifically?
Well, I think anyone but arching through the low back. So
Okay.
usually that's a sign that you don't have the available motion at the hip or the rib cage. So then you kind of arch through your back and flare the ribs and let the pelvis go forward. So in that case, it comes back to that question you asked me about kind of the movement piece I would work on first before moving into heavier lifts, which is that stack and being able to breathe into the back and get a good rib cage over a pelvis.
You mentioned a lot of women have narrow rib cage. I've actually, one of my friends here in Austin was like, "No, I thought you were narrow, but you're a wide." How do you know, and what is the difference, and what do you do with that information?
Yeah, good question. So it's not a good or a bad thing. It's
Yeah.
just how we're built. The way that I measure it is at the very bottom of the sternum, which is where your xiphoid is. And if your audience wants to look that up, but I have them put their fingers way up in there. And if that area is really narrow, in this area, so the upper part of your rib cage is really narrow, I usually consider somebody to be more of a narrow rib cage. Usually you'll see a pelvis that is a little wider. In a wide rib cage, this angle kind of comes out more and there's a space between the rib cage at the bottom of the sternum, and it looks like the lower ribs. And it's not necessarily a flare, because regardless of which rib cage you have, you can still have lower ribs that kind of flare up and out. So it can get confusing because sometimes people mistake a flare for being more wide, but I'm not surprised you said you're wide. So we're kind of built a little bit more similarly, I feel like more of like shorter muscular build is probably a little bit easier. And my rib cage kind of is a little, I'm not like super narrow, a little bit wider. And my pelvis over the years, as I've gotten better at actually making myself wider on purpose so that I can manage pressure better, because it is kind of helpful when you're lifting heavy things to have a wider rib cage and a little bit of a narrower pelvis to be able to push the pressure up from the pelvic floor. So, yeah.
So how should you train differently then, I guess, wide versus narrow? Or is there a training differently?
I don't believe so, because it's just about how you manage pressure, and but we're all still doing all the movement patterns. Like
Right.
never would I do with a client be like, we're not gonna do squats because you're a narrow, or
Yeah.
know what I mean? It's just that I might bias certain exercises a little bit more to help improve that pressure. So if I have a traditional narrow, but we all have layers of compensation, and they have, think of like when a woman gets pregnant and they're intra-abdominal region gets bigger, and then the pressure's pushing down in the pelvis, and the pelvis opens wider at the top. So if I wanted to reverse that as the woman is, postpartum, I want to promote activities that pull the pelvic inlet closer, so the top part of the pelvis in more narrow. And things that would do that would be getting into the mid range of a squat, so kind of that 90 degrees of hip flexion, doing hinges, and that opens up the back of the pelvis and closes the front of the pelvis. And so I can just knowing that in my understanding, I can help women by being like, okay, we might prioritize a few more of these things right now until you gain the ability to manage that pressure a little bit better. And then it's kind of like once you have access to all of the things, you're just doing all of the things.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm glad that you brought that up because really we have a lot of women postnatal, also perimenopause, menopause. But I feel like there's a lot of like rebuilding of trust in your body, especially after having a baby. So, how can women have that trust back in their body again, specifically like maybe their hips, pelvic floor after childbirth, injury, years of overtraining?
Yeah, that's a good question. If the very short answer is give them as many points of contact and constraints as possible. So if I'm coming out of a situation like that, we sort of get disconnected in our bodies. Just like if I have an injury, let's say I have a labral tear in my hip or my shoulder,
Mhm.
it's almost like the ability for the body to communicate at that joint is limited. So there's what's called mechanoreceptors in the joint. And as our bones rotate within the joint, that's signaling to the brain, I know where I am in space. And so people who are more hypermobile have a harder time with that because there's not as much congruency in general. And so if you give them a wall to put their hands on and a floor with their feet on and a band around their knees and things to help them sense all the parts of their body, it helps them to feel safer in a way.
Yeah, yeah, that's actually really great, and it's bringing me into I just started somatic therapy. Have you ever
Oh, yeah.
do you know
Oh,
much
yeah.
about that? I
Oh,
just started, I didn't know much about it, and then I'm like,
okay.
"Oh, well, actually that makes a lot of sense." Because I she's like, "Okay, touch the couch, like look around, feel things on your body." It's like the same thing with movement based, so that's really helpful.
Yeah, I love that you compared it to that because I do think of the um, that ability to communicate in your body isn't just improving your movement experience and your physical health, it's improving your mental health. And so I think those spectrums like help you come to the middle. So if you're working on your interoception, that somatic practice, it's allowing you to connect more with what's happening in your body from an autonomic nervous system. That's super helpful. But then also being able to give the same connection of the body in a physical sense can meet that in the middle. Like that's kind of how I think of it. So both are so important.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I didn't even know it existed until really pretty recently. And then I was like, oh, this actually is really helpful, especially for a mover like me. Like, I just like that physical body awareness too. And so having you relate it to be a part of fitness is so powerful. So you mentioned, breathing a lot. And like really, I would say strength starts with stability and then stability starts with your breath, right? So how can we find that breath? Why do you feel like people struggle with finding their breathing like while they're exercising? And how can we give some cues for with that?
Good question. That's a loaded question.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we could take it back a little bit and we'll go one at a time. What do you feel like? How can we start with breathing and breathing techniques for people?
okay. So we can use what I call active or passive strategies. So, a passive strategy is a little bit easier, and most people can get on board with it. So, I give them a lot to my clients because otherwise, they're going to leave me and they're not going to do what I told them to do because they're having to work too hard at it and they don't feel like dealing with having to think about it. So, a
Yeah.
passive strategy, if I wanted to push pressure back into my back, I could I could get into a rock back position, or I'm trying to think what people might think of that as like child's pose, but think of the knees together. and I could hunch over my thighs and just put my elbows on the floor in front of me. So
Mhm.
when I inhale, the pressure has to go into my back. And when I exhale, I'm in a position where I can get all the ribs to come down because I'm already kind of crunched forward. And so in that position, I'm teaching them to push pressure back, but I'm also creating space in the rib cage. And I think a lot of people don't understand that the ribs change shape over time. And so if we are really compressed in our back and we tend to have kind of ribs flared forward, it's a really easy, simple way to create that shape change. Now, active drill would be I'm laying on my back and I take an exhale, get all the air out, and I have to feel my abdominals. And then I have to keep my abdominals on while I'm inhaling. And when I do that, the pressure can't come out the belly and it has to go back into the back. But I have to have the awareness and the sense to be able to hold my abdomen tight when I'm pushing pressure back. So when you think about exercise, we're standing up against gravity. Can you brace and essentially do a Valsalva without it all coming out the front, but also going into the back to create that 360 brace on a heavy lift? Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. How do you put that in practice?
So you mean over time with somebody?
Yeah, yeah. If they're like, okay, all of that is making sense, but I still can't feel it. Just like what you were saying is like your clients that they can't feel it and they're like over it and then they don't practice it.
Yeah. So I give them the passive so they get the feeling of the sense of pressure going back. And
Mhm.
then I usually do start them on their back and
Okay.
want to over time get them to be able to feel it. But if they can't, I can do something like a cable chop, like a rotation. And so
Oh
when
yeah.
they put cable, they're like, oh yeah, I feel my abs. Okay, great. Now we have like the sense from the cable. And then can you hold that and take a full breath in? Just holding that constant tension.
Yeah. Okay. Should women be breathing differently or being more aware of their pelvic floor during specific lifts?
Yes and no. When they are under heavy loads, they're moving quickly. Those are not the times that you should be thinking about it.
Yeah.
If you are symptomatic, then in your warm ups, in your accessory work, it is helpful to have some exercises where you're tuning in and then also being able to learn how to assess yourself for areas where you can't breathe into or your pelvic floor is really tight or can't come up the way it needs to and actually be active for you to hold that pressure, which is kind of a skill you have to learn over time if you're symptomatic.
Yes, for sure. Okay, so this is only for women that maybe have some incontinence or have some sort of pelvic floor dysfunction.
Yes. And also recognize that if you have low back pain, SI
Yeah.
joint pain, gut health issues, likely you have some improvements available to you in your pelvic floor that you can, take advantage of. Because sometimes I think we think, oh, if I'm not leaking and I don't have prolapse, then I don't have any pelvic floor issues. But that's
Yeah.
not really the case because the pelvic floor is so important for all of those other things too.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we could go down a whole rabbit hole of all pelvic floor things, but I want to make sure that we talk again about that breathing and core control. How important is this when you are getting into like your athletic abilities, reaching PRs, like actually on the performance side of things?
So it depends on the sport, to be
Okay.
honest. I had a baseball player who's in eighth grade here on Saturday, and his shoulder was really hurting. And putting him in an exercise where he was breathing into certain areas made his shoulder feel better because he had more range of motion to go into.
Okay.
But you kind of have to be careful not to take them out of the patterns that are helping them be good at their sport, also. So I think it's a good balance of understanding when you're adding motion back in so they can feel better in their bodies, and when you're allowing them to just go into their patterns so they can be better at their sport. And so when we talk about gen pop or general population and you're working with clients, I think the biggest thing is prepping the body prior to the workout. And then after they've done a bunch of the athletic movements, which you hope will be better because you got them in a position that their body can manage pressure better, then you can give them an activity that helps restore their range of motion and their breathing patterns and maybe the compensations they created by doing all of the drills and athletic movements and the heavy PRs and all of that. So that the rest of the day, they're not walking around in that kind of twisted, irritated, tight body. They're actually able to relax, which will start the recovery process quicker too. So instead of going to bed with a body that's just super tight, they're going to bed relaxed in their body. So their nervous system can calm down.
Yeah, and I'm glad you say that, warming up and, making sure that you're doing your mobility and dynamic warm up drills and before you get into lifts is so, so important. It's in all of our programming and stuff. But if people only have like 30 or 45 minutes, Katie, what if they hear this and they're like, I don't have time to do all this other like pre-work before I actually do the workout? What could we tell them that is like, this is so important too?
So most of my clients only have one drill.
Okay.
It's a breathing drill. And if I
Yeah.
were to give your audience one thing to try before they start their warm up or their workout from a mobility standpoint, is to get in that position I mentioned earlier and
Yeah.
just lean over your legs and take 15 to 20 deep breaths into your back and then start your workout. And you're going to gain range of motion and feel a little bit more centered and stacked in your body. So it doesn't have to take a lot of time. And I get it because nobody wants to sit there and be doing, my warm-ups are 5 minutes. I do 4 exercises. They're like the same ones every single time with a tiny bit of breath work, and that's it.
Interesting. So I'm going to try this tomorrow, Katie. I'm going to be like, all right,
Yeah.
I'm going to get in this position and try. So like you're in, you said a child's pose position, feet together, knees together, your belly is over your thighs and you're taking intentional breaths to your lower back.
Yes. And so and kind of mid back too. And if you want
Okay.
to level it up even more, get a Pilates ball and put
Yeah.
it on your lower rib cage. So it's kind of keeping those ribs in check down there.
Yeah.
And then just slowly inhale and feel the expansion into the back.
Okay. Well, if you don't listen to anything else this podcast, listen to that
Just do
piece
that.
of
Yeah.
it. When we talk about just women being more athletic in general, because we know that like I feel like muscle mommy is in right now, Katie. So I'm appreciating that fact. But I also feel like women want to be athletic too. So what do you feel like are your core pillars when it comes to, having the strength and athletic ability as you age?
Wait, did you say muscle mommy?
I did. You haven't heard that term before?
No, I love it. Wait, so
Shut up, really? You
I
haven't heard
swear, but I'm not in like your side of the movement world where it's like, yes, it's like get strong, build a lot of muscle, which I do want people to be strong, but you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's in my plan.
Yes. Yeah. Muscle mommy is definitely the term of the year, I think.
So they're trying to build muscle while they're pregnant and after. Is that kind of like
Yes, also like in perimenopause and menopause, just for longevity. But I do feel like there is this transition now to like being strong is great, but also I want to be more athletic. And I don't really know how to like add that in too. And so if you were to tell us like your core pillars on, what how can a woman be more athletic, what would those be?
okay, great. So this was the one thing I wrote down on a piece of paper when I read your questions.
Yeah.
So I could actually like say what I think would be best. So I would learn
Okay.
how to manage pressure. You can start with that exercise that we just talked
Yep.
about. That's going to be priority number 1. And then I would work on improving relative motion at the joints. What in the world does that mean? You can go to my Instagram and see a bunch of examples. But
Yep.
basically, I would learn how to whether it's through something like FRC, where you're kind of rotating a joint, oftentimes in more of an open chain. So you're kind of like rotating your hip socket, rotating your shoulder in different ranges of motion, or in what I call hip shifting or shoulder shifting. So, like pushing your arm forward to protract your scapula, retracting it back, getting good at different positions, your arm overhead, retracting the scap protracting the scap. And then in terms of the hip, it's kind of the same thing. So you're like pushing the femur back in the socket, the upper leg bone back in the socket, and that's kind of rotating the pelvis, but it's also changing the way the femur is rotating within that bone. And so if you can get good at some of these basics, it can really help improve your movement in those bigger lifts where that has to happen naturally when you're under heavy load. And so it kind of restores that motion, but it also allows for fluid to get inside the joint, and fluid is incompressible. And that incompressible fluid creates more space in the joint. So you have healthier joints overall. And then the other one I wrote down was learn to co-contract to reduce motion. So most people don't know. I feel like none of my clients knew what a co-contraction was. And it's kind of I wish I had a better term for it. But basically, it's any activity where you can kind of tension your whole body so that the muscles on either side of the joint are all working collectively to create stability at the joint. So if I were to be in that same hinge that we talked about earlier, and I just held it at the bottom, and then I went up to my toes, I would have my calf, my quad, my hamstrings, my glutes, all holding tension while my knee can stay in the same position. And so the ability to be able to create that tension is what we need to feel athletic, because when you do like a cut and you're trying to get to something and you have to come back out of it, that's when you have to co-contract to prevent so much motion that you fall over. And then the fourth thing is learning how to train your connective tissue. And what that means to me is understanding that there's progressions when it comes to athletic movement. So I wouldn't take somebody and have them do 20 squat jumps that hasn't done a squat jump in 20 years, right?
Yeah.
I probably would want to progress them, and this is my model, but through isometrics, which is just holding a body still and allowing the joint to get used to that motion. So in the case of, let's say, the knee, because that's an easy one to think about, I can push my knees over my toes in a squat and hold that. And then my patellar tendon and my quadriceps tendon, all that connective tissue that helps keep the joint healthy, is under load and stress. Then I could take that same activity and do something a little more dynamic. So like dropping quickly into a squat. Then I could teach someone to leave the floor and do that same motion, but like actually adding that impact in. And the connective tissue is going to be in an environment where there's less likely to have injury or niggles come up, and the body's more prepared for it. So good progressions with, loading connective tissue. So not like muscles necessarily, not thinking about it like that, is number 4. And then I always say, like, if you want to be athletic, get good at plyometrics. And not just for the sake, like I said earlier, of getting your heart rate up and trying to burn a bunch of calories, but actually good at doing the motion itself.
Yeah, yeah, those are also important. And I love that you brought up isometrics, because I feel like that's definitely like underrated when it comes to like just fitness programming in general. And so you mentioned isometric holds, and then maybe you'd push them a little bit further into maybe you're leaving the ground or not, you're not there yet.
So I like to do isometric holds as part of a strength program, because I agree with you. I think it is one of the best ways we can improve our connective tissue health. And it's a great opportunity to pay attention to that hip hike or like the rib flexor. Like you're just sitting there for 45 seconds. I mean, it's hell. So you got to distract yourself with something, right? Yeah. Might as well use that as an opportunity. And then, of course, your strength building, most people are considering in their strength training, they're concentric and eccentric. So that base is kind of covered. And once you have a good level of strength, so imagine that I'm in like a split squat position. And as I come up out of it, I've got a cable in my hands above to the outside of my head. And then as I come down, I kind of chop quickly and drop down into that split squat. That was an example of building an athletic base without losing the ground. So I'm not yet jumping and having that impact, but I'm creating a more forceful, speed-driven drill that is teaching me the properties of kind of what we call yielding into tissues and creating space. And then I like to, and there's other ways to do that too, where it's more fast and dynamic. So you're changing the speed, but without necessarily the impact. And so then I go into plyometrics and usually start with things like pogos and kind of some simple learning to drop and catch a little bit, just simple things like that. And then that just becomes fun because as you build those skills, you feel so much more confident in your body. Like it's amazing when women are like, this is so fun. I haven't done this in years, because we do that when we play sports or when we're kids, but we grow up and it's like, and then a lot of times we're going to the gym and all we're doing is these basic kind of strength, each muscle group. And that doesn't have this, in my mind, it doesn't have the same feeling of really moving your body and having fun with it.
Yeah, and this is such a great point to put back into play is a lot of people think that, jump lunges or jump squats and they just like go through the motions and they do them really quickly. But again, if you're putting that intention behind your training, you can get so much out of it and it can show up in your other activities, like you're saying with pickleball. But
Exactly.
it's that like coming back into your body and, becoming, more body aware and not just going through the motions.
Yes. And that's the crazy part to me because somewhere along the line, and I mean, you've been in this industry for a long time, as have
Yeah.
I. And somewhere along the line, I started out as an athletic trainer. And so I was working in like sports and then switched to personal training not long after, and then corporate wellness. So I've kind of been in all the worlds. But when did it switch to this high intensity hit training without a lot of thought? Like, I don't know when that actually came about. Was it CrossFit, which is very athletic? But to train, to do those activities, you have to be serious about your training. You can't
Yeah.
just be like going through. But then that led into Orange Theory classes, boot camp classes, and a lot of it had this underlying message of go, 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 no rest,
Yeah.
go right to the next activity without a lot of thought. But in reality, that doesn't support your goals. If you're going to do conditioning, go do conditioning, ride a bike,
Yeah.
jog on a treadmill, like something that doesn't require so much movement competency that you can easily screw it up.
Or get hurt, right? Like,
Yeah, or get
like
hurt.
so,
Yeah.
so much of those that you're talking about with HIIT or CrossFit or high rocks training nowadays, like people are getting injuries because their body's not ready for the volume that they're putting in. And they don't have those basic movement patterns down really quite yet, too. And so I
Yeah.
think that's where, a lot of the things that you put online and like our programming is really just based on like, how can we become better athletes overall, not just for like one specific thing? So if we were looking at, let's say, like a woman that wants to be, athletic and strong, what could their like typical week look like as far as programming goes? Like, would you add in athletic plyometrics every day, or how would you typically add that?
Good question. Okay, just out of curiosity, because I know you do a ton of programming. What are the constraints in terms of a woman's time that you typically abide by?
Yeah, good question. Like 30 to 60 minutes, but I would say typically I program for 45 to 60.
And then is that like 2 or 3 days a week or sometimes more?
Typically three or four.
Okay.
2 to 4, I would say max. Yeah.
I know. I
Yeah.
was having this conversation with one of my employees recently. I was like, do we make this program 2 or 4, 2 to 3 or 3 to 4? I was like, I feel like it's going to stress people out if I go 3 to 4. And like, there's
Yeah.
always, because we're busy, if you're,
Yes.
then you have kids and you have a business and you have da 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 da. It's just like a lot to get it all done. So if let's just say 30 minutes a day, I would program in plyometrics and more athletic movements. I would start with your warm up. So for instance, say I'm typically in my warm up, I'm doing, I don't know, actually, you give me an exercise you might do in a warm up.
Yeah. Some sort of passive squat rotations or shin box switch or something like that.
Okay, great. So instead of the passive squat with rotation, maybe I'm doing one set of that. And then on the second set, I'm doing like a TRX hold and doing some squat jumps to kind of yield into those forces. Doesn't have to be like max effort, but
Yeah.
getting a little springy
Okay.
within warm up. And then I love using plyometrics and dynamic movements as what I call my CNS driven work. Like
Yeah.
that's prepping my body to be, my nervous system to be more stimulated. And I actually think 2 sets of just 2 exercises goes a really long way. One of those exercises I like to be a little bit, think of this as like propelling yourself forward and more stiff. So, what that could look like, a pogo jump or a broad jump, something that like pogo would be like on more of the beginner scale. You're just doing like
Yeah.
small for your feet. And then on the higher end scale, imagine like a really long broad jump or connecting broad jumps.
Mhm.
And then I like the other side of the coin, which is more yielding. So something like a push up where you sink into it, or a squat jump where you sink into it. Or that could be even as lower level as the drill I said earlier, where you're chopping and going down into the motion fast, but you're not necessarily leaving the floor. So you can do 2 sets of each of those activities for like 10 reps, and you're building that connective tissue health just within your warm up. Or those could be accessory drills after your main lifts too. They work really well as prep for the main lifts.
Okay. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And it's really like you can add it just based on your schedule, right? Like whether you have two, three, or four times a week, like adding it in your warm up is awesome. Putting it toward closer towards the end. If you're working on a specific goal, maybe it's like Katie, right now I'm trying to get my furthest broad jump and my best vertical jump. And so those are something that like I'm consistently adding like throughout the week, but like in little spurts because we're not just focusing a whole workout like on that too.
Yeah, and you definitely can. Like, I'll have training days where it's sort of, a full body or some kind of split, just more strength based work. And I
Mhm.
will those little tidbits in the warm up or in the accessory work. And
Yeah.
it simple as like, oh, I could program a split squat in this workout. I could, instead of that, I could program a split squat with a chop that's like yielding into it. So, like, I could
Right.
do the same thing. But sometimes I will program a whole day
Okay.
of working more through dynamic and plyometric type activities. And the nice thing about that is you don't need that many touches. So for somebody that just has 20 or 30 minutes, you can really get a great workout that's going to rev up your nervous system a little bit more, which means you might need a little more recovery, but in less time. So
Right.
a good way for those people who just want like a quick 30 too.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. We have been in the industry for a really long time. Like, I don't know about you, but this is like probably my 12th year on Instagram. I've had my own business for almost 10. It's still dominated by men. I would say, like, especially male educators. And how did you navigate that? And how did you push past, some of that, maybe imposter syndrome in the past and to where you are today?
I love this question because I hope it inspires other women.
Yeah.
um, so, yes, I have been, it's 25 years now, which is hard to imagine of
Yeah.
being in this industry. And, from the get go, I was in a position that I wasn't ready for as a student athletic trainer at Florida State. And I felt very insecure. I think I was insecure overall as a 20-year-old woman in any role, right? And they would take us into the training room and they would put us on the spot, and we had to have an answer for all the questions. And it was really intense. And it was a very male, and I hate to say that because not all men are like this. I'm just saying it's like
Yeah.
a like harsher way to learn. And I remember thinking, God, I would never do this to someone. I think people actually, my nervous system, I was so nervous. I was so insecure. My mind would go blank, and I
Mhm.
wanted to crawl under a rock and cry because I felt like I wasn't good enough. So guess what? I quit the athletic training program and went into more strength and conditioning and, well, I'll just say exercise science and nutrition because I didn't have that environment. And I don't want people to quit that are really smart and really capable of doing things that they don't think they can do. And for me as an educator in this space and as a trainer, that meant providing a safe environment for my clients even when I want them to work hard. And in fact, providing that safe environment and understanding what their somatic needs are, what their physiological needs are, I would get better performance without having to treat people that way. And in the learning space that I teach, it's the same thing. I'm providing a different resource than what is out there in the majority. There is lots of people like me now too, but I'm just trying to provide a space where I'm saying, hey, you have a voice, it's strong, you can do this, and I'm providing a safe space for you to do it in. You can lift heavy, heavy, heavy. I can be like the most encouraging wing woman in the world. Like, yes, you've got this, you're crushing it, but I'm not like, go, go, do it. You know what I mean? Because not everybody responds to that. And so as I move along in my career, I've just found that empowering other women that you can do this in a way that supports that other narrative, I guess. Hopefully that wasn't too long-winded, but
No, yeah, it's great. I mean, like, I definitely do get a lot of women coaches that come to my page. I'm sure come to your ears too. And it's really helpful to just say how much you're owning your expertise, who you are, how you show up for your clients, and taking up space in this like very male dominated world. So, for someone maybe who's just starting out, maybe a woman coach or trainer or educator who's just starting out, how can we get them to take up space and feel comfortable in still a sea of places where they might not feel comfortable?
yeah, try to do the things that scare you and don't shy away from it and do it over and over again. And that's probably a movement too. I mean, I think part of the reason the whole athletic body resonates with me is the most powerful I've ever felt in my life is when I was an elite gymnast, when I was throwing backflips on a wakeboard, when I was kiteboarding. Like those things made me feel powerful as a human being too. Just like your people who are hitting PRs and like super strong. I'm assuming the reason you put that message out there is not just because you want them to be strong, but you want them to feel super powerful as a human being, And like
Yeah.
that goes such a long way in shifting the narrative of like this male dominated space. Because when you feel powerful in your body, you feel powerful in your mind, and then you can pass that on to other people. And so if something makes you uncomfortable, just take a moment and question why it does and then how you can move past it. For me, that looked like 8, 9 years ago, posting on Instagram every day and like wondering if my content was, resonating and thinking that I might be wrong about things, but still posting it and being like, well, I don't know. Like maybe I am wrong. It's okay to be wrong. And then like getting on podcast. I used to be so afraid to start a podcast. I'd be so anxious. Teaching a course. It doesn't have to be a course. Teach something to anybody else and just like challenge your mind like that too. Because you probably do know more than you realize It's just, there's always that little person back in your head that's like, you shouldn't be talking about this. You're not as like educated as them. But really, where you're at is just fine. And somebody needs to hear that because they're where you're at or just below where you're at. And they're not going to understand this like really complex stuff yet.
Yeah, yeah. It's so important to just know also just to like put yourself out there and be uncomfortable and like do the scary shit because that's how we all grow and evolve as human beings anyway. But go take up space. That is the one thing you should know from this. What's the last thing you want to tell women? Like, what do you feel like every woman should hear from you today?
Ooh.
What do you want to leave them with?
If you take an inside out approach to your health, everything in your life, in your mind, in your body will improve. So that can start with the breath. it can start with your nutrition, it can start with your movement, and that can be from a nervous system standpoint, it can be from a muscle standpoint. But if you take into account what's happening on the inside as the priority, both physically and emotionally, your overall health will improve at limitless potential.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's a really great way to put it because I feel like it's something is so like some in an industry that's so aesthetically driven. If we take it from the inside out, you can get so much further overall.
Yeah, and you'll still make huge aesthetic gains.
Truth.
You
Yeah.
know, yeah. I
You
mean,
still will, but I think that when you switch the perspective, you get more out of it. But that's my opinion. How do you feel about that?
yeah, I 100% agree. Now, if you're in the world of bodybuilding or physique, that's a whole different story. You have to look at individual muscles and you have to like really work on that symmetry. But if that's not your world and you're just here to, feel healthy, move better, get strong, build muscle, take that inside out approach and your body will thank you time and time again, for sure.
Katie, where can people find you online, learn more about you, see you on Instagram, and all your things?
Sure. So you can go to katiestclairfitness.com. There's no space or period in St. Clair, just the word, because everybody always
Okay.
asks. And there's a lot, I have tons of free things that you can sign up for, or you can go to Instagram, same thing, Katie St. Clair Fitness. YouTube's the same as well.
I'm glad that you said that actually, because so it's St. Clair just with a capital S, no period, no space, the C isn't
Yeah, and no
capitalized.
E at the end. It's like my name is
Okay.
impossible to find in a computer system.
Yeah, but at least it's just katiestclairfitness.com. It's like, boom, we got that.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you so much. And please, you guys, we've been talking a lot, but the way Katie moves and how she explains things and cues is just so awesome. So please make sure you follow her on Instagram and on all platforms, katiestclairfitness.com. Thanks so much.
Thank you.